I am a grateful believer in Jesus Christ who struggles with sexual integrity and alcohol. My name is Jay, but you can call me Pastor Stitch. Today, I am a senior pastor as well as a leader in several Celebrate Recovery ministries, including CR and Broken Chains JC. And this is my personal testimony of God and his sanctifying work in my life. But clearly, I didn't start here. A little over 8 years ago, I realized that I needed to have a change in my life and that the only way it would come about was if I let Jesus Christ lead me. I started the process of trying to be sober, to stop living my compulsions many, many years before. What I was missing was a real process to go with my decision. I was putting together the things I had learned from the years of trying to become the better person, hoping that would help me to be successful in life. I thought that success would look like having influence and respect with people around me. But the whole time, I had something ruling my thoughts and my mind and all of my alone time that made me resent and hate my life. Proverbs 14:2, there's a way that appears right to the Lord, but no. Proverbs 14:12, there is a way that appears right, but in the end leads to death. I had spent years trying to learn everything I could by reading so many self-help books, going to seminars and classes, but I had never seemed to get to the point that I had any real success. I would see improvement in my life for a short time, then I would relapse and be deeper into the hurts and hangups and habits than ever before. Even before I got married the first time, I was struggling with my desire that by every definition was immoral, but in the world, even over 30 years ago, was seemingly approved of, or at least in some respects. I wondered about my sexual identity, and I often wanted to be dressed like a woman. I thought that if I got a living girlfriend and eventually got married, that would solve my problems because I would be able to satisfy my desires in, a moral way. But all I found was more pain because I could not satisfy the lust that had been caused by the abuse and dysfunction of my younger years. As a child, I had been abused by a couple of neighbor girls I would play with. They would also babysit me and my brother, and the things that we did together were confusing to my young mind. Add to that the fact that I had found some hardcore porn that depicted things that left me really confused about sexuality. And I found myself wanting and thinking about things that no child should. At one point, my mom found out that I was looking at the pictures in those magazines and told me that looking at things like that was wrong. And that looking at women without clothing was also wrong, unless I was married to her. It was against God's commands. I was brought up in the church and had already decided to follow Jesus. By that point in my life, I really did know him as my Savior. And I knew someday I was going to be a pastor. So mom's words that day made me think and also left me feeling alone. I was maybe 6 or 7 years old at that point. What mom said seemed strange because all the newspaper ads and mail order catalogs all had pictures of women in their underwear. And since that's what I wanted more than the pictures of naked women, how was that any different? And if that was true, how could anyone please God? All I seemed to see all around me was images like that. I didn't know that it was because I had already been conditioned to look for them. I never had an opportunity to give a voice to what was bothering me. I thought my mom would always be disappointed with me because I couldn't seem to stop looking. And clearly, God was done with me until I could stop looking at things and thinking about those things. To top that off, I felt like Dad must be done with me because he and Mom were arguing all the time. He had even quit going to church, and it must be because of me. There were 10 years. Then there were the years of puberty that confused things even more. I felt isolated and alone. What I thought was only my struggle. After high school, I found that girlfriend and moved in and got married after she got pregnant. I started drinking to cover over the pain when I couldn't seem to find release from my compulsion, from the safety of what mom said was okay. My world was consumed with two thoughts. Either I needed to find sexual release or I needed to get drunk. Eventually, things got so bad that I couldn't even separate those desires. I found that my life was empty. Unfortunately, for my first wife, that meant I was continually informing her that she was not meeting my needs. And since she had her own demons, she eventually had an affair and left me. But it wasn't before we had a child together. The next 8 years, I was single dad, raising a daughter every weekend, a weekday night, and every other weekend. But my compulsions were growing deeper as I allowed myself to cross each boundary that I thought I would never cross. While I was convinced I was keeping my private life from my daughter, it was affecting my parenting because I was either drinking or thinking about sex. I even made sure that my daughter's friends in school were from single parent homes so I could hook up with their moms while the girls played in the other room. If we were home and I wasn't busy doing some project or actually meeting a necessary need like making dinner or doing laundry, so, my daughter wouldn't be neglected. I was in my room acting out with my compulsion, leaving her to watch TV in the other room. Whenever I didn't have her, I was closing the bars down and hanging out with anyone that could feed my thoughts and desires. If it meant my compulsion would be entertained, I was all for it. As I was working as a satellite repair technician at the time, working on the receivers and working alone in the shop most days, I would find any excuse to watch things that would tickle my fantasy life. After I got a job in a factory where I was making much more money, I found that drinking got even worse because, well, the men I worked with would drink every night after work. So now drinking every night too. Eventually, I met my second wife. She was a friend of a friend, and we were living together within months of sleeping together the first time. I thought that this marriage would fix my compulsions because in the beginning, I stopped thinking about all the perversions and was only thinking about her. Plus, we're drinking together. So there was that. Shortly after we got together, I got full custody of my daughter, and my fiance was staying home every day to be the mom my daughter needed. I thought that everything was going to be perfect. I had the mom to take all the parenting pressure off of me, and I had an unlimited sex and perversion partner, except she didn't know about my perversions yet. That was so unfair to both my daughter and my wife. We got married short after we got custody. My drinking eased, but my perversion was gaining in my mind. But my wife's desire for me was waning. Primarily, I'm sure, because, well, I was putting all the responsibility of me being happy on her and the entire responsibility of parenting on her as well. I thought that my responsibility, well, that was to make the money. And if I did that, she'd be willing sex object for me and my mom, for my daughter. Willing sex object for me and a mom for my daughter that I wanted. Our relationship became even more strained the longer we were together. Eventually, we discovered that when my daughter was with her mom on weekends, she was being molested by my ex's live in boyfriend. This led to years of struggles, both with my daughter's mental health and my expectations of my wife. The more I demanded from her, the more distant she became. Eventually, my daughter was arrested for domestic violence. She had knocked me out by hitting me with her flute case. While she was in juvie, she decided that she could get special privileges if she was pregnant. So she said she was. They took her to the doctor and found it not to be true, but when she was questioned about who the father might be, she had to come up with an answer. Because of her past use, she knew it would be believable, so she said, "It was me." My wife and I were both called into the sheriff's office separately and questioned. After the questioning, they told us that what my daughter had said. Both the prosecutor and the sheriff told us they knew that neither of us had done anything wrong, that my daughter, with her past mental health issues, was just trying to game the system. But I was told that I could never be alone with my daughter again, because if she ever made the accusation again and I didn't have someone to corroborate, I would automatically be guilty and go to prison. It was at this point that my wife was just done. So she was so afraid of what life would look like with me going forward. She informed me she was leaving me. Within days, I had a breakdown and didn't even want to live. I called my dad, told him I was done and wanted to leave this world. I thought he'd call the cops to come check on me, so I grabbed my rifle and went back into the woods where I planned to start shooting at the police when they arrived and hoped they would shoot and kill me. After a couple hours and no cops, I decided I needed more to drink and went back to the house. Dad got there a little later. He lived about 200 miles away and drove right down after my call. When I had hung up and didn't answer his return calls, he got in his truck, drove straight there. He stayed the weekend and went home when I left for work on Monday morning. Over the next week, I struggled. I destroyed the house in rages of anger. I drank and indulged my addictions more than ever before. Why not? Nothing had ever done any good. Nothing had ever worked, so I might as well implode. Well, eventually I ended up in the mental ward where I received some medication that got my brain chemistry stabilized. But I had also recognized there was no hope for me because I thought that God was done with me and my only option for a real life was with him. I decided that any semblance of success was forever gone, so I might as well just drink and indulge my perversions. I left the hospital and gave another patient a ride home. That was being released at the same time. I took her to my house for a while first before taking her to her place. That was just another boundary I thought I would never cross. I had decided I would never have sex with another woman while I was married. But I had just had relations with another woman while I was still married. I found out that my wife had been having an affair with a man from work. She left me to go live with him. So I decided I was done with trying to live right. I was getting a divorce. I couldn't let my daughter come home. Time to just do what I wanted. While I was aware that living with God as my focus was the only way to live life and make it okay, I was not willing nor ready to do it. But God, he had other plans. Years before I was ready to change, he was putting pieces in place. I had started using a dating site and the internet to meet my needs, while also drinking enough to stay numb to the knowledge of what was right. At this point, my life was living in this point in my life, I was living in complete denial. Through one of those sites, I met my wife, my current wife, Rhonda, and started dating her, knowing that it would fail, but hoping that I could change. And if not, well, at least I could have some fun. At the beginning, I convinced her that if she wanted to be with me, she would have to put up with all that I wanted. Eventually, I decided she passed the test and would be the perfect wife and proposed to her. Some things were different this time. Without realizing it, I was putting God into this marriage. I had finally realized I was powerless. I asked her parents for her hand in marriage. I proposed in front of her entire family, and I convinced her that since she had never been married before, we needed to do the wedding thing right. Many times in my life to this point, I had quit living the life of sin, gone back to church, even to the point of teaching adult Sunday school classes. But every time I would feel God pulling me back to my calling, I would relapse and leave the church. So when I decided we were going to have a real wedding, I decided it was time to go back to church so we could have a pastor marry us. We did get married, and I was beginning to feel the pull back to the church and ministry. So I quit. It was easy because it was a hunting season. So I excused it as I was just being close to God in the woods. I mean, what better way to get close than in his creation? putting that mask of denial back on once again. A few years later, after falling back deeper into my old patterns and dragging my wife along, God arranged an opportunity for us to be in a wedding of a friend. And when we met the pastor and his wife of that church, they were so real. I finally realized I couldn't run anymore. It was time to actually make a decision and find a process. I'll never forget that day in September 2012 that I finally surrendered and admitted that I was powerless and I could not do it at all. I said, God, if you want me to be free from this sin, you're going to have to do it because I've tried too many times. I can't, but I want to be done. Over the next several years, with the help of the pastor and a lot of time studying and praying, I was gaining recovery, and that was bringing real sobriety. It was at this point that God brought Celebrate Recovery into my life, and I learned about the principles of recovery found in Scripture. Over the next several years, I would study and apply the principles taught in Celebrate Recovery to my whole life. The principles found in the words of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 5. Principle 1 and its corresponding verse probably has the greatest impact in my life on a daily basis, even more than most of the others, except possibly Principle 7, which says that I need to read the Word every day. Principle 1 says, I realize I'm not God. I admit that I'm powerless to control my tendency to do the wrong thing and that my life is unmanageable. This is what I had done that Sunday in September, even before I learned about Celebrate Recovery. I just couldn't do it, but I wanted to have the life of freedom. Today, I know that every morning I have to remind myself that it is only through God that I can accomplish anything. Matthew 5:3 says, happy are those who know they are spiritually poor. The kingdom of heaven belongs to them. I had heard this verse all my life, and until I read it in this translation, it made no sense. I had always read it, happy are those that are poor in spirit. What's that supposed to mean? But read this way, it made perfect sense to me. My spirit was poor, lacking what it needed. And because of that, I had room for Jesus to come in and fill that emptiness. I've worked many step studies and learned so much about my life from sharing with brothers in those groups. In one of those groups, listening to a brother share their life, I remembered the abuse of my childhood. By the time I had hit puberty, I'd blocked out the actions of the neighbors, but now I had a reason for so many of the desires that had haunted me for years. Those participants' guides in my first step studies, combined with the weekly regular open meetings of Celebrate Recovery, changed the way I approach my recovery. I was no longer chasing sobriety. I was looking for God to be first in my life. I learned that just clean time was okay, but if I lived all the principles in my daily life, sobriety was a given. Today, I have a passion for recovery and ministry because of the words of Jesus Christ. While I've always known that Jesus came to save me from my sins, I could not see how that was a possibility before. Because while I was always achieving some period of time living right, it never lasted long. And I was convinced that forgiveness was only for those that had better willpower than I could put together. Principle 2 says, earnestly believe that God exists, that I matter to him, and that he has the power to help me recover. Matthew 5:4, happy are those who mourn. God will comfort them. Today, I realize that it is only because of his forgiveness that I can find freedom from my hurts, my hang-ups, and my habits. Today, I can see how Jesus pre-planned for all of our struggles and gave us direction to find that freedom that we think of in the word salvation. John reminded us of that in John 3:16 and 17, when he said, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. If you're a newcomer, I hope that you will take some time to look at the steps and principles of recovery and how relying on the love of God will be able to transform any life, no matter how depraved it may feel at the moment, or no matter how righteous you may feel. Those steps will help you stay grounded in who the process is. Don't give up before you see the miracle God has just for you. There is no greater freedom than knowing that you can do it, but that it is finished. On the cross, Jesus said, "It is finished," John 19:30. In this statement, he declared that he had done the work, and all we have to do is receive the word and apply it to see the benefits of living in his kingdom. If God can take this man and transform me, and he's not finished with me yet, he can do it for all of us. Even if you've never even read the steps, or maybe you've been studying and living them for years, I know that God is going to do an amazing work through this process called Celebrate Recovery, because Jesus Christ does not fail. I hope in my sharing today, you can see I don't deserve to be a pastor, much less leading a church. Yet, because of the process that Jesus Christ gave all of us, he can redeem and use any of us if we just allow it. I want to thank you for letting me share. God bless.